Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. To truly understand the Montana Department of Corrections, one must go back in history. The Innocents were said to have been a gang of outlaws in the old Montana Territory who operated during the gold rush of the 1860s. These individuals are said to have preyed on shipments and travelers carrying gold from Virginia City, Montana. According to an early historian, Thomas Dimsdale, the gang attempted to steal gold during these transports and killed many people who resisted them. Sheriff Henry Plummer of Bannock, Montana, was actually accused of leading the group, and he was executed by a group of vigilantes from Virginia City in January 1964. But scholars have noted that there is a lack of hard documentation and historical evidence pertaining to the Innocents. And these scholars state that the acts were probably attributed more likely to a small number of independent, mostly loosely organized outlaws. Nevertheless, in response to rampant lawlessness and vigilante-style form of justice that was present at the time in the newly formed Montana Territory, in 1867 the U.S. Congress allotted $40,000 to the state for the purpose of building a territorial prison. This old prison served from its creation in 1871 until statehood in 1889, when it continued serving as the primary penal institution for the state of Montana until 1879, when a new facility was completed. Throughout the old prison's history, it was plagued with constant overcrowding, insufficient funds, deteriorating facilities, and corruption. July 2, 1871, U.S. Marshal William Wheeler took possession of the first 9 prisoners to be incarcerated at the pen. It only took a single month before the prison was overcrowded, and by August of that year, 6 more prisoners had arrived. Population ebbed somewhat when in June 1874, another tier of 14 cells were constructed and a 12-foot board fence went up around the prison a year later. But the prison's population continued to grow, so Congress allocated an additional 15,000 for more cells. But the soft brick building could not support any more weight, so instead the money went to an administration building with guard barracks, a warden's office, and a visitor's center that still exists today. Finally, in 1885, $25,000 was provided to build a 3-story cell block with 42 double occupancy cells that were completed in 1886. Thus, the Montana Territorial Prison was finally completed to the original specifications, just in time to be handed over to the new state of Montana in March of 1890. But the facility was viewed as a money-sucking operation, costing over $2 per day per inmate to run, which would be a drop in the bucket today. But it was an eyesore, an administration's nightmare. Montana then decided to do what many states were doing at the time, and they contracted the running of the prison to a pair of men who offered to care for inmates at the rate of 70 cents per day for the first 100 and $1 per day for each inmate over that. These men were the warden of the facility after 1885, being Thomas McTagg and his partner, guard Frank Conley. Born in Havre de Grace, Maryland, Frank Conley set off for the American West at the age of 16 and ended up landing in Montana, where he worked to create what would later become part of Yellowstone National Park. By 1884, he was a member of the Central Montana Vigilance Committee and later became deputy sheriff of Custer County. In 1886, he supervised a prisoner transport to the Deer Lodge prison, and upon learning of a vacancy in the rank of guards, applied for the position, which was given to him. In March of 1890, he was made the warden of Montana State Prison, while McTagg remained the financial administrator. But Conley oversaw everything else and launched a series of projects which made the Montana State Prison function. Probably the most important contribution Warden Conley made to the prison were the many buildings constructed under his watch. He believed that idleness bred insurrection, so he set about using prison labor to build the facility, to build a fortress. Immediately after taking the position, he put inmates to work building a log cell house to alleviate rampant overcrowding. The building housed 150 inmates in one large room and 2 tiers of wooden bunks. Conley waited a few years before starting one of his biggest projects, the stone prison walls, which extended underground for 4 feet and were 3.5 feet thick, tapered to 2 feet at the top. The imposing structure also had towers, which dominated the southern end and resembled a medieval castle that still can be seen today during tours of the old pen. In In 1919, Warden Conley's personal friend, William A. Clark, one of Butte, Montana's copper mining kings, donated $10,000 for the construction of the first U.S. prison theater in history, and it was dubbed the W.A. Clark Theater and was the pride of Warden Conley and his administration. It boasted seating for approximately 1,000 people and leather-covered seats and catered to prisoners and members of the community alike. It hosted large concerts, plays, even prize fights, as well as movies. And for Warden Conley, it became a disciplinary tool. Unruly inmates were denied any access to the theater. It became a mainstay of prison life until its destruction by an arsonist in December 1975. During his long tenure as warden, Conley used prison labor to run 11 separate ranches, which produced beef, pork, poultry, and dairy products for prisoner use, as well as farms that grew vegetables for inmates and to feed the animals on the ranches. He even had a slaughterhouse and built a brickyard which could produce up to 60,000 bricks per day. His prisoners were also loggers who processed lumber at a sawmill that Conley oversaw. But Conley had some problems with prisoners who did not like his hardline rule: either work or go to the hole, administrative segregation. The community began to complain, and many people basically viewed it as slave labor. The community began to complain about his use of prisoners and his using the office of warden for personal gain. When he first arrived in Deer Lodge, he had just been a lowly paid deputy guard, but within 20 years had risen to be one of the most powerful men in the region, and was even voted mayor of Deer Lodge several times between 1892 and 1929, a position he held for 8 years after being removed as warden. The main man responsible for Conley's downfall was Montana Governor Joseph M. Dixon, who ran under a platform of countering the Anaconda Mining Company ran by the warden's close friend William A. Clark, and to get them out of state politics. Upon investigation and finding out that the warden was heavily involved with the company, the governor launched a series of investigations and audits, which show Conley's corruption, especially between the years of 1908 and 1921. Dixon wasted no time in bringing Conley to trial. The judge, however, could find no written statute which fully defined that Conley had broken any laws. Immediately after the retirement of Warden Conley, there was a long string of gubernatorial appointees that never lasted long. Warden M.W. Potter strove to keep the prison functioning on a cost-effective basis, and started off with pardoning a significant number of prisoners who were incarcerated during World War I and during the early years of Prohibition to keep overcrowding down and costs to a minimum. However, without Conley's business connections and long project contracts to keep the prisoners busy, the number of work programs dwindled and the money stopped coming in. The result were prisoners were now faced with heavy overcrowding, boredom, low-paid staff that didn't care, in a living space that was not up to modern conditions. At the time, few Montana wardens ran background checks on potential guards, and there was no formal training after hire. By the mid-1950s, 80% of the guard staff were over the age of 55, and in 1957, there was about a 75% turnover of guards. In order for the remaining staff to keep order in prison, they instituted the old harsh Auburn system, trying to keep inmates quiet, obedient, and segregated. But the rapid succession of low-paid wardens added to the low morale of both guards and prisoners. There were many dangerous convicts housed at the old pen. From 1913 to 1915, the facility housed Charles Carl Pazram under the alias name of Jefferson Davis. Yes, the same name of the former president of the Confederacy. He was an American serial killer, serial rapist, child molester, arsonist, robber, burglar, and just basically a mean, sadistic psychopath. In 1903, his mother is said to have sent him to the Minnesota State Training School, which was known as a very harsh reform school. Pazram later wrote in his autobiography that as a young boy, he was repeatedly beaten, tortured, and raped by staff members in a workshop that the children dubbed the paint shop, due to leaving the room painted with numerous bruises and blood. Pazram hated the school so much that he decided to burn it down, and did so successfully without detection on July 7, 1905. In my Oregon Part 1 video, I mentioned the killing of Oregon State Penitentiary Warden Minto, and Pazram was involved in that case. Eventually, Panzram confessed to have murdered 21 boys and men, and some suspect that he may have killed more than 100 boys and men during his crime sprees. In his autobiography, Panzram wrote that he was the spirit of meanness personified, and that he would often rape men who he had robbed. Eventually, he was executed by hanging in 1930 for the murder of a prison employee at the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. Perhaps in response to harsh punishments like the hole, aka Siberia, which is called administrative segregation today, many prisoners wanted to escape. In 1902, a convict named Thomas O'Brien, who worked as the head stable boss of a barn outside the walls, drugged Conley's dogs that were used for hunting and tracking down escaped convicts. He stole Conley's prize racehorse and escaped. O'Brien was on the run for 18 days, after which he turned himself in and was severely punished. But he was paroled in 1903 and wrote a very controversial book describing his harsh treatment at the hands of Conley, who he stated also brutalized other prisoners. A more serious escape attempt happened in 1908 that left Deputy Warden Robinson dead and Warden Conley severely wounded. Everybody knew that Conley had a habit of holding what he called Warden's Court each morning, where inmates lined up and could air their grievances. Conley was a menacing 6 feet 6 inches tall and weighed roughly 300 pounds. He was a very intimidating man, and often when inmates complained too much, he beat them down. What his physical bulk could not handle, he carried a .41 caliber pistol and made it clear he was not afraid to use it. On the morning of March 8, 1908, Deputy Warden Robinson allowed the men to line up to speak with the warden when he was rushed by 4 men. One managed to get past Robinson and burst into Conley's office, wielding a knife and threatening the warden. Conley then drew his pistol and fired twice, hitting the convict in the ear. The remaining 3 inmates rushed in and Conley fired again, and the convicts retreated into the hall. Conley then went to help Deputy Warden Robinson and seeing that his throat was slashed. A convict named George Rock was still stabbing Robinson when Conley threw a chair at the assailant, who then turned his rage on Warden Conley. But the large and violent Conley fended him off and pistol whipped him, and had one of his guards beat the convicts with a billy club. Deputy Warden Robinson eventually lost his life, and it said that it took 103 stitches to stabilize Warden Conley. None of the 4 rioters died, but Conley made sure to bring them up on charges, and after a quick trial, 1 was acquitted, 1 was given a life sentence, and 2 were hung, using a 300-pound weight, almost the exact weight of Warden Conley, who thought that this would snap their neck, but at first it failed in both instances, until Conley saw that they were dead. The warden ruled with an iron fist, and this incident only reinforced the fear among the inmate population that Conley could not be killed, and would enact swift retribution towards any inmate who acted up on his watch. The draconian laws and harsh treatment of prisoners at the old Montana State Pen led to a lot of bad feelings by the convict population that often led to other major disturbances and riots. I'm going to have to stop right there, but I'll be back soon with part 2 on the Montana Department of Corrections. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.